Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's IRMS session. So my name is Iram Ditter and I'm the IRMS Legal Group Chair. And in my day job, I work as a Global Information Governance Operations Manager at law firm Latham & Watkins. And I'm pleased to bring to you this session today with our lovely speaker, Lewis Eisen. And Lewis will be delivering this session on writing IG policies, appropriately named I Love My Organization's IG Policies, said no one. A little bit of background on Lewis. So Lewis has worked as a lawyer, an IT manager, a business consultant, an IM specialist, and a government policy writer. And he now combines all of those to show organizations how to shift their policy writing culture from confrontational to cooperative. And he's the author of the international bestseller, Rules, How to Write Rules That People Want to Follow. And it's now in its third edition. And his approach to policy drafting is used by organizations across North America and in Europe. And I think you can actually see 2 copies of his book behind him on the bookshelf just there. So before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. For those of you who are familiar to Livestorm, you'll already know this. We have a question section and a chat section at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, whether or not you're using a laptop or a mobile device. I would encourage you to chat amongst yourselves informally using the chat section. But if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the speaker or myself, please use the question section. That helps us keep all of the noise in the chat away from the questions that you all want answers to. So I will then monitor the question section and I'll push those questions to the screen to be answered by Lewis. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to our speaker, Lewis.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start by sharing with you a message I got from a doctor's office. Well, it's an imaging clinic, actually. So my doctor had set me up with this appointment, and I never heard from this clinic until 2 days before when I get this message. You must confirm your appointment, and $75 threat for not showing up. And I think, you know, when I go there, I should mention to them that maybe they'd like to soften the wording up a little bit. But when I got there, I saw this sign on every wall. Now, what do you think of that? Can you just reach into the chat? Use the chat just one, and in 1 or 2 words, you want to tell me what you think about that? Isn't it? Thank you, Paul. Oh yeah, OMG, you know? What's that telling you? It's exactly, Claire, if there wasn't a confrontational atmosphere before I walked in there, there certainly is now. They sound angry. I agree with that. We're not getting a lot of positive adjectives here. So Karen, I mean, not only have they had a lot of issues, but they've now announced that they've had a lot of issues. Okay, so this is the first thing that's a problem. That, you know, I'm going for a medical procedure, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm kind of nervous. I'm not sure, and I look at this and I think, oh my God, I don't want to be a witness to an altercation. I don't want to see this negative stuff happening. Like, what am I doing here? So it's definitely not putting me at ease. That's the first thing that's wrong with it. The second thing that's wrong with it is I highly question its effectiveness. That is, do we really believe that somebody who's about to get angry at the reception staff, who are very nice, by the way, get angry at the reception staff, steam coming out of their ears, ready to go ballistic, is going to look at the sign and go, oh, dearie me. Oh, I'm not supposed to get aggressive. Oh, let me change my tactic. Golly gee. I don't think so. Okay, so in terms of the actual benefit it's supposed to have from the people it's targeted to, I don't think it's going to work that way. But I think the worst problem with this is it makes it look like the entire staff is walking around with their fists clenched, ready to punch back as good as they get. From the receptionist to the medical staff to the administrative staff, it looks like everybody's there in a defensive mode. Thank you, Robert. That's your word, but that's perfect. The sign was written by one person, and yet everybody wears it. Nobody stopped to ask, what does this rule sound like from the other end? The people who read this rule, what is it that they're going to think about us? Obviously, we need to have policies, but we need to word them in a way that it engages people, doesn't get their back up. And what we'd like is people to follow our IG policies cheerfully. We want them to cooperate. We don't want begrudged obedience. Okay, that's not getting buy-in. So the question is, from my perspective, what can we do to work in that direction? So you've heard a bit about my background. I got into this field because when I started working at one of the large Canadian government offices, people came up to me. I was running the records, integrated record system at the time. My staff came up to me and said, nobody's following our policies. Everybody's ignoring them. Why are we even bothering? This is a waste of time. We send them notices, we put up memos, all this kind of stuff. So I looked at the policies and boy, they were aggressive. Boy, they were full of all kinds of words like always and never and will not be tolerated, with lots of bold and underline and italics. The goal is to get people to say, I like that policy. This is a great policy. Everybody should have that policy. But in order for it to reach that goal, it needs to be worded in a way that people can do that. So this is a typical wording of a policy that you might see in an IG environment. Nobody except the people who wrote this are going to look at it and say, this is a wonderful policy. I love that. It just isn't worded that way. So from my perspective, this is the grand question. We are trying to create a particular type of corporate culture, a culture that respects information governance and the various values that information governance brings. What can we do to increase the alignment between our policies, the way we word them, and the kind of corporate culture that we want in an organization? What I found when I was working at the government office is that policies have a tone of voice, and rulemaking got very confrontational. So we ended up with this us against them mentality. You know, we're making the rules and they're not following it. And that's really not where we want to be. So I guess the question is, what kind of culture would you like to see in your office? I got a little poll for you, if you wouldn't mind. You can just grab your phone, just pull up the camera. That will take you to a QR code. If you'd like to use your browser, because you're at a desktop, just browse to sly.do. And then when it asks you for a code, enter the code IRMS. And you'll see a poll that says now command and control empowerment. It's on a scale of 1 to 5. The question is, where 1 represents an approach, a culture of command and control, and 5 represents a culture of empowerment, how would you describe your current policy regime? Command and control says we tell people what to do, how to do it, and we expect them to do it. Empowerment says we're going to train them on what they need and give them the tools, and we know they'll go out and do their best. So how would you describe your current information? If you make a mistake on your voting, just vote again and submit it because it makes a correction. And you'll see the results as you do that. We've got about, so far I see about 15 votes in, 17, and we're averaging about 2.6. That's pretty typical. You know, I think we've been Jekyll and Hyde in the information management environment for a while. Record keeping, we were kind of like, for a long time when it was just on paper, we said, well, you guys can't classify. We're the classifiers. We're the experts. We know what we're doing. And then we got onto electronic information. And my God, we can't keep up with all this volume. You guys better classify. You guys need to, boy, you're doing a lousy job. Give it back to us. We're going to be the classifier. We can't possibly keep up. We're going to have to train you to classify. Oh, we can't train you to classify. This back and forth between really not deciding whether we're trying to empower people to do the job or whether we want them to do it exactly the way that we tell them to do it. So that's our current, we've settled here on about 2.6. We've got about 2/3 of the people voting in on that. If you could wave a magic wand and move the organization to where you would like it to be, whoops, where would you put it? Okay, results are coming in, but you can already see that's quite a difference. What we had an average of 2.6 before, we're now up in the 4s. A difference of 1 is a significant difference. So most people are feeling really, no, our job needs to be to empower people. Okay, so we need to be writing policies that empowers them to do the job properly. All right, let me ask you another question. Would you say that you have a defensive policy culture or a trusting policy culture in your office? A defensive culture says, unless we tell people not to burn down the office, somebody's going to do it and say they didn't know it wasn't allowed. That's a defensive culture. Trusting culture says, no, we tell people what to do and we know they're going to do it. We don't assume that they're trying to get around it. Okay, so we're averaging here about 2.9 there, okay? Still pretty much on the low side. All right, bring out that magic wand again. If you could wave your magic wand and put the organization where it should be, where would you put it? Okay, huge difference, huh? There's things we want to set up a culture where we're not telling people by the way we word the policy, we don't trust you. Like that original one does that says, any aggressive behavior here will be called the police. So we don't trust you not to know this on your own, is what says. Okay, so quite a difference here. Finally, would you say that your current organization operates within a culture of black and white thinking or a culture of accommodation? So when a police officer sees a car speeding down the road at 130 kilometers an hour, the police officer stops the car. If the officer looks in the passenger seat and sees a woman in labor and the guy driving says, I'm taking my wife to the hospital, the officer doesn't write a ticket. He takes and leads the person to the hospital. That doesn't change the law. That's somebody acting with compassion and understanding and discretion on the circumstances. Very often we are, and not just we in information management, but in most of the corporate services, we are so afraid of the floodgates. We are so afraid that if we make an accommodation somewhere, that somehow we're going to have to do that for everybody else. Otherwise, all hell will break loose, that we don't make any accommodation. The truth is, we'd like to be able to do as well as we could for as many people as possible. We're afraid of. I was at one organization where people would call from across the country and ask questions once a week, and every week the group that was answering the questions would sit there cowering. Oh, please, I hope they don't let them ask about governance. We don't have it. I don't want to hear them ask. That is, nobody wants to have to say no. Instead of saying, yes, we'd really like to do that, we're not there yet, they're afraid of saying no. So they write a policy in a way that means I will never have to say no, because the policy makes this clear that you're not going to put me in that position where I might have to say no. These are all messages that come out from the policy itself. All right, let's move on. Now that we've decided what kind of policy we'd like, how does that show up in the wording? I'm showing you an HR example first because it's easier to see when it's somebody else's policy. When you look at the wording of these two, clearly in the left, that office has not been getting very much cooperation from people around asking for a 7-day lead time. But actually, I think we can see more than that. I think if you read that policy on the left, we can see how the people in that HR office are feeling about that. Can you enter into the chat your perception? Once you look at that, what's your perception of the way those people are feeling? Frustrated. Thank you, Valerie. I think frustration is absolutely the very first one. I think annoyed as well. Absolutely. Yes, Claire, I think that means frustrated, but in a little more a little more direct way. Anything else besides frustration? Yes. I think so scared. I think they're feeling defensive. What else we got? I think they're feeling stressed. You're right. I think they're feeling maybe undervalued, disrespected, unappreciated, overworked. Now, look, we all get it. We've all written policies where somebody doesn't follow the policy and we get frustrated that they're not following the policy. But do you think it's appropriate that that frustration shows up in the wording of the policy itself? Because all we had to do was look at this for 30 seconds and we can see it there. Those of you that are working in an open government or open document environment where you throw your policies online for transparency purposes so that people can see it, the whole world will know that that office is frustrated, that that office is not getting the cooperation it wants, and they're not happy about it. The whole world will be able to see that. That's really not the kind of thing we want to be telling people. Again, we are so afraid sometimes of having to say no, or we're frustrated that this emotion comes out in the wording of the policy. We can fix that really quick, really easily. Just change it from a negative to a positive. We may not have enough second monitors for everybody, but we want as many people to ask as possible. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. If everybody wants to do this and we can't accommodate it because we don't have the people, that's a good thing. That brings that demand to the attention of the brass. Now, why are the policies worded with this kind of tone of voice here? This sort of very harsh, you're going to listen to me tone of voice. Most people who write policy weren't actually trained on writing policy. They write according to what they learned about making rules. Where did most of us learn about making rules, do you think? Think back. Where did you learn about making rules? I think so. Parents. I usually get 3 answers on this one: parents, school, and then somebody usually says the nuns, but whatever school they went to. We grew up hearing rules being given by parents and teachers, and the messaging that came with it was that rules should sound bossy. If I'm giving you a rule, I should sound like I am telling you what to do because you're going to obey me. Now, just to let you know that I don't blame everything that went wrong in my life on my parents. I think what they were modeling for us were how adults in charge make rules for children they're responsible for, not how adults make rules for other adults. And that's a very different skill. Fortunately, for decades, if not centuries, that bossy attitude was reinforced by an office culture where bosses used to yell at people, their employees, their underlings, with impunity. Now, I know I probably look 25 years old on Zoom. I hear that all the time. I'm actually a baby boomer. And some of you that may be closer to my age may remember when you would be in an office and a boss would yell at somebody and there was nothing you could do it. A boss would yell and scream and abuse people. There was nothing you could do it. But nobody gets away with that today. Nobody talks like that today to their employees. Today, we are sensitive to communication styles. We worry about collaboration and diversity and inclusion. Nobody talks like that, but a lot of them still write like that. So the writing hasn't caught up. It doesn't always persist that way. A lot of organizations have changed their tone of voice in their policies. Where they haven't, it's usually just because it's not on the radar. They haven't looked at it. When they look at their policies, they look for accuracy, currency, relevance, but they don't look at the tone of voice. It goes unnoticed. And it doesn't go unnoticed by the people who have to read it. How do I recommend that people write? I believe in the power of the present tense. This most powerful way that you can write a policy. This is about what we do. This is about the way the office runs. It just is. There's no must, there's no should, there's no you shall and you will, and there's no threat here. This is our policy. Okay. Now, we have an enforcement issue, but the enforcement issue is a separate issue from the way we actually word the rule. The rule itself should just be worded in the present tense. Now, there's going to be a number of you who look at that and go, that looks kind of weak. My best friend is a policeman. When he first heard me talk about this, he looked at that and he went, no way, he said. That might work for some mamby-pamby, touchy-feely organization where everybody sits around singing Kumbaya, but that's not going to work for a serious organization. That's not going to work for law enforcement or military or health, anything where there's real seriousness. And because if the rule doesn't sound serious, then people aren't going to believe that they're serious about enforcing the rule. Well, is that true? I know a lot of people think that way. As a lawyer, from my perspective, the most serious rules that we have in any jurisdiction are the criminal rules. The rules against, murder, robbery, the nasty stuff. How are those rules worded? People must never kidnap each other. Murdering others is absolutely not tolerated. No exceptions will be made. No, that's not how the criminal law is worded. Here's the criminal law in the United Kingdom. Look at that. It's just in the present tense. No parent-child dynamic. It doesn't talk down to you. It doesn't assume that you're going to want to get around the rule. It's just giving you a plain statement of this is the way we do things. There's the Canadian Criminal Code. It's exactly the same thing. It's just in the present tense. And if you do it, here is what the punishment is if you're found guilty. There's Texas. I have done a survey of all 50 states of the United States, and 80% of them use this present tense format. 10 of the states use what I would say is rather antiquated old language, whomsoever shall be caught setting fire to a building, will be taken to the public stocks and flogged or something. But 80% of the criminal codes in the US use this present tense. There's from Australia and France. Look at that. So we have a very absurd situation in all these jurisdictions. The most serious laws for the most heinous crimes are worded more respectfully than many of the policies that come out of our offices. We talk more nicely to criminals than to our colleagues. You know, if you were just to go by the tone of voice of the rules, you could be forgiven for thinking that murdering your boss was not half as serious as not putting the information into the repository. The social scientists will look at our documents a few years from now, and they're going to say those people, they really didn't like in offices, they didn't like office theft, they didn't like people being lazy, but apparently the worst crime in an office was to leave dirty dishes in a sink, because you should see the way that rule is worded. Now, we reach for this heavy-handed wording as a matter of course without even thinking of it. Government is particularly bad at it. Here's an example I took from a government site. Instead of putting it in one of a number of positive ways that we could put this rule, we reach for the negative. But what a different attitude. The one on the left is a bouncer standing at the door going, wait, are you 65? You can't come in. Whoa, not you, not you, not you. Whereas the ones on the right are someone saying, hey, do you qualify? Come on in, we have something for you. Hey, are you 65? We've got something for you. It's a whole different attitude to making rules. Any questions about this notion so far? Has anything come up at your end, Madam Moderator? I'm going to take that as a no.
Sorry, I was double muted. Said no questions so far.
Good. Okay. All right. So there are a number of ways that we can soften our wording. And by soften, I don't mean make less strict. I just mean make less vicious, make less condescending. One of the major ways we can do it is to recognize the difference between a policy and a standard. A policy is a set of rules about what people do. A standard is a description of what something looks like when it's done well, when it's done right. So here's a very mundane example, but it illustrates the point really well. On the left, you see what are actually probably more procedural steps than policy statements, but they're written as policy statements. They're written with you must, we say this, you must do it. On the right, we've taken a totally different tack. We've said, from our professional opinion, here is what good looks like. Now, the advantage of the standard is that you can take it and walk it around to different areas of your office and say, what's it going to take for you to meet this standard? Here's our metadata standard. What's it going to take for you to meet that? Some groups will say, oh, no problem, we can do it now. Some groups will say, oh, you know what, this is really tough. I don't think we can do that. And you can respond, what about if we aimed for 50% of your holdings to be to meet the standard by the end of this year and 100% by the end of next year? See, if it's a policy, they're immediately in breach of policy. So what we have set up is a regime for all kinds of people where half of them are in breach of policy at any given time. Okay, but when we set it up as a standard, we're saying, no, this is the target. Now, the determination of whether the target is mandatory, optional, voluntary, recommended, targeted dates, that is a determination that takes up much higher up. That's the job of the boss. If you were to say, here's the standard we need to meet, here's the risk we have for not meeting it, here's the cost of fixing it if we don't meet it, it's up to the people at the top to say, you're right, I don't want to take that risk now. Or to say, well, you know what, I'm willing to take that risk for another year. But our professional contribution is much clearer in the description of the standard. When we were still working on shared drives, and a number of you, I say it in the past, but I'm sure a number of your offices are still working on shared drives. And we had people who are complaining about offices that people had folders, the drives weren't clean. People used, Sally's files and my old letters and things like that, and names. And they had all these rules about how you should clean and name your document. And I said, no, what's the standard? What does a clean drive look like? So we didn't have that. What does, I need to see from your description, give me a description of what a clean drive looks like so that I can say, yes, I want to meet one. Jana agreed 100%. If we're frustrated that people are not doing their disposition when they should be doing their disposition, what I need to see is a description of what a good set of information holdings looks like. And the good set of information holdings, if there's a statement in the standard that says it is free from holdings that have passed their expiry date, okay, now we have a positive statement that I can compare the standard to what I have. It's a whole different attitude from us telling people what to do. I can't tell you the number of people that have come to me and told me a story that sounds something like this. We were going to hire a new HR director. It went really great. We had 3 interviews, and then they asked to see the policies. And then they said, no, thank you. You people are not what you made yourselves out to be. You said you were modern and collaborative and you cared about respect for others. And I'm looking at your policies and you really don't care about respect for others. You're just bossing people around. So everybody wears it. Even if you didn't have a hand in writing, we wear it. You ever look at a rough HR policy, something that sounds strict and inflexible? We tar the entire HR group with it. Well, if you've got a policy in the IG space that sounds condescending, the entire IG group is tarred with that attitude. It is just presumed to belong to everybody. And that's not a presumption we want to be working with. Somebody usually, whenever I do this talk in many jurisdictions, and whenever I do it in Britain, somebody usually at this point says, in Britain, we're kind of used to the class structure. So we're used to people giving us orders. So I don't have an answer for you on that one. It may be a good topic of discussion at some point, but I throw it back to you. I don't know if that has any influence on the development of office culture in Britain in a way that it hasn't had in North America or the other colonies. Okay, it's very possible it has. But if it has, it's something we've got to get over, okay? Because we don't make those distinctions in the workplace anymore.
I have a question for you, Lewis. And I'll pop it on the screen. There you go. So do you recommend putting detailed examples such as a how-to section, about retention disposal schedule in the policy itself or in an associated?
That's an excellent question, and it lets me talk about another point. I don't believe policies are for reading. No one's reading your policies? Good. That's the way it should be. Policies are not for reading. They're for reference. Guidance is for reading. If I were to ask, and I see that I can't actually see hands or faces here, but if I were to ask, for instance, how many of you voted in the last election or the previous election? I'm sure everybody would put their hand up. Did you read the Elections Act first? See, that's the policy. That's the official rules. In fact, have you read the entire criminal code? That all applies to you. Have you read any legislation? That's the official policy. No, what we read is the little manual that says what you need to know in this election. The way You have the red. Yes, we've got legal people here. Some legal people have read the criminal code. Absolutely. In fact, I sometimes use this with the filling out tax forms. Did you read the Income Tax Act? And there's always somebody in the crowd who's read the Income Tax Act. But most of us don't. That is, the way HR people use HR policies is different from the way the rest of us need that information. The way IG people need to reference IG policies is different from the way the rest of the people use that information. Okay, so policies are, if we among us can agree on exactly what the policy says and we all have the same interpretation, we've achieved our goal. We need to translate that into something for the public by putting it in a manual, public or the employees by putting it in a manual, in a guidance. That's where all the explanation, training, repeating the policy, repeating the legislation, giving our recommendation, giving our advice, that all goes in the guidance. I do not believe, I hear about, this often I hear someone said, well, everybody should be able to read the policy. I don't think that's true. I think the policy needs to be technical where it needs to be technical. And we should not sacrifice the accuracy of specific wording because we need to dumb the policy down for people who are not in this field. I don't want the doctors at the hospital dumbing the medical policy down so that I understand it. If I need to use sanitizer or wear blue mitts or something, they can put in a guidance together for that. I don't want the airline pilots dumbing down their stuff. I don't want any professional group dumbing down their stuff so that the rest of the world can understand it. That's the difference between policy and guidance. Even if you read your little booklet on the Elections Act, and the little booklet that tells you what to do when you want to vote, and you didn't understand something, it is highly unlikely that you would reach for the Elections Act to try and clarify it. You would go to somebody who works in that field. So the people who do not work in IG do not reach for IG policies the way we often think they should. We do not reach for HR and finance policies that way. It's exactly the same. So there's quite a difference. Thank you for raising this point. So when I talk about the official wording of the policy, this is, if the time you'll need it is in a time of crisis. The only time, if the guidance is well written, the only time you will actually need the official policy is if somebody storms into your office and says, where does it say that I'm not allowed to have my own social media account? And then you'll pull out the original policy out of your pocket and you'll show it to them. That's the only time you'll need the original policy. If your guidance is well worded, no one will ever have to see the original policy, and you will never have to read the Elections Act. Any other questions? That was the only one. I assume the questions are disappeared, so there aren't any. I'd like to move on to my last area, if I could. And that is about values-based policy. So 80% of the policy that you're going to write, people are going to go, fine, okay, I'll do it. Yeah. And 20% of it tends to be, I'm not doing that. I'm not, you just can't get their buy-in. Doesn't matter how much, people who say, yes, I'll do it, but they end up not doing it. So how do we deal with that 20%? And the answer is, you need to work with values-based policy in order to appeal to the values. My first experience with values-based policy was when I was writing my book and I needed to convert from paper to Kindle format. You may know that Kindle still has monochrome devices. So I couldn't use whereas in the printed version and in the color editions, we've got black text and a bright sort of burgundy examples all the way through. It looks very nice, professionally designed, but I couldn't use those colors in the Kindle version, so I had to choose new colors. Kindle gave me its color policy. Now, it could have done it wrong. Didn't do it wrong, did a wonderful job, but it could have done it wrong. Here's what wrong would have looked like. You must use one of these colors. Now, if I had seen this I would have thought what I'm sure you're thinking right now, which is, honest to God, are those the 5 ugliest colors you could possibly find me? And then I would say, why are you even telling me what to use anyways? I'm the author. Like, why don't I not get to choose? But they didn't do that. What Kindle did was this. Here's our policy on covers. We conform to W3C recommendations for readable contrast. Well, of course, I can buy into that. Right now, I buy into what we're doing. Everybody should do that. I like this policy. Now that I like it, I say how. Show me how. And then they gave me a standard. Now, this standard was particularly technical. It's to come up with an RGB color. And I looked at it, and after a while, I said, well, you know what? Can you show me some examples of that? And now I get examples, but that's fine because I bought into the policy because the policy was about the value. Too often, because we are experts in our organization, we know we want to take the organization from here to there. We know the best way to get from here to there is to go straight, turn right, turn left, and turn left. So we write a policy that says you must go straight, you must turn right, then turn left and left. And we wonder why people don't buy into it. Okay? We write policies that are simply procedural statements, and we wonder why people don't buy into it. So we can map this out, actually. Your organization has a series of information that it needs to spread out. It has business values at the top, a mandate, mission, business values, principle, strategy, etc. That's all the business side. And then underneath, we have formal authorities, policy, standards, procedures. You may also have external authorities like statutes, regulations, professional bodies that we incorporate into this organization, but basically the business runs according to its own business structure. And underneath is all the advice you're given. So what happened here is that Kindle said, we're going to adopt the W3C standards. That's that's going to be our policy. And it gave me a standard and it gave me some examples. Now we can reverse engineer here to figure out what the actual value is. But I have to tell you, we're looking for the core value. If I asked you, what is the value behind this rule? What do you think? What value are we trying to hit behind here? Katie, that's the typical answer I usually get, but no, I'm going to give the award here to Paul. This is about inclusion. That is, usability and accessibility are simply means to get to inclusion. Okay, that is, we have all kinds of strategies for inclusion. We might have a diversity in hiring strategy. We might have a fairness strategy. We've got all kinds of things, cooperative strategy, consultation strategy. We also worry about usability and accessibility, but the ultimate core value is inclusion. Now, when I objected to using these colors, I had 2 bases for the objection. First was they're ugly. That tells you that my value is aesthetics. The second was it wasn't my choice. I'm the author. Why can't I choose? That tells you my value is personal preference. So we need a corporate statement that says somehow inclusiveness is more important than aesthetics or preference. Now we can see this right from the very top. Based on a value of inclusiveness, we have a accessibility strategy that produces a policy that says we adopt W3C standards. If somebody says, I don't believe in inclusiveness, your answer might be, maybe you should work somewhere else. If they said, though, I believe in inclusiveness, but I don't think that accessibility is one of the things we should be spending our time with, now we can have an adult discussion on that. And if they say, I believe in accessibility, but I don't think the W3C standards are the right ones, we can have an adult discussion on that too. And it's all based, though, because we bought into the very, very top core value. Most of what we do is based on a core value, and yet we bury it. Here's an example of a very typical policy that I see coming out of an IG shop, but I don't actually see a policy. What I see is a standard, YYYMMDD, that's a standard target, and a mandatory procedure. The date, use this format in this place. That's a procedure. It's mandatory, but it doesn't tell me what the value is. It doesn't tell me what the policy is. So let's reverse engineer here. What is the value behind this particular rule? And be prepared that I might tell you no. What's the value here? So consistency, I have to say, is a strategy. Usability, strategy. Why do we care about consistency? Yeah, Christina, you are very, very close, but still, with discoverability, why do we care? Thank you, Tony. You're much closer to it. Yes, everybody on the same page. So we're looking for a single word here. What we're looking for is either accuracy or clarity. That's what we're trying to get. The justification is we want accuracy or we want clarity, and we feel we can get clarity through a strategy of standardization of dates, okay? That's the connection. And again, the people that said that's not the way we do it in our area, that's their preference, we're going to need a statement that says accuracy is more important than preference. Let me show you standardization as a value. You know the TV detective Monk? He's OCD and he kind of like, you know, solves all his problems because he's OCD. For Monk, standardization is a value. If there are 8 glasses of water on the table, they all need to be the same height. Doesn't matter whether the glass is filled up to the right amount, wrong amount, but they just all have to be the same. Standardization as a value says all the same. Your clothes will be the same. Your work will be the same. Your chairs will be the same. We don't have standardization as a value. We standardize or we aim for consistency in order to achieve another value. That is, we might standardize on technology to get an economy of scale or to get interoperability. We might standardize on hiring practices for fairness. So those are the ultimate values. Standardization is simply our methodology to get there. Okay, so the same here. Our actual goal is accuracy. And again, how can I tell the difference between a core value and a strategy? If your organization says we care about accuracy, but you work there and you can see that they don't care at all about accuracy and there's all kind of inaccurate information there, people will leave. If they say we care about standardization and they're not standardizing things, are people going to leave? I don't think so. And they'll grumble. They won't like it. They'll try and change it, but they won't leave. If you say we care about safety and it's clear you don't care about safety, people will leave. If you say we care about customer service and you don't care about customer service, I think people will grumble. If you say we care about human decency and respect and you don't care about that, people will leave. But this says we've got to draw the difference between the ultimate value, because that's what we're aiming for. And that's the one that everybody in the organization has in common. So now I can come up with what I think is the policy statement here. And it's something like, we use a single date format across all our systems. That's going to be our policy. That's the line that you want people to look at and say, great policy. I wish every organization had that policy. Okay, because it's based on a value. Let me show you one other example. I don't even see a standard here. All I see is a procedure. Privacy impact assessment is a procedure. It's a mandatory procedure, but it's a procedure. I don't see the policy. I don't see the value. What is the value here? And it's not privacy. If privacy were a core value, we would have been protecting it from the beginning of time. We only started protecting privacy recently, the last few decades. What's the value of protecting this privacy? What's the ultimate value there? Thank you, Susan. That is earning, and I'm assuming you're saying this, but I'm just going to expand, earning the trust of the public. It's trustworthiness, okay? That is, we say in order to earn the public's trust, we're going to need to protect their private information. We're going to need to do a lot of other things too, but we cannot survive unless we have the trust of the public. Now, for a commercial organization, if you work for a commercial organization, a core value might be survival. That is, if people don't trust us, we're going to go broke. We won't exist. Government doesn't have that problem, but they still need the trust of the public. So now that I've established that this is a policy about keeping the trust of the public, I think I can, the polling, again, you can play with the wording here, but the policy itself is something like, we take steps proactively to prevent privacy breaches. That's our policy. And that's what you want everybody to say, yes, great policy, show me how. Yes, that's a wonderful policy. Let us take steps proactively to prevent privacy. Trouble is, in our area, we think this is obvious. We think everybody should see that the reason we're doing this is because we are taking steps, but it doesn't happen that way. People don't know our area, and we walk around usually touting IM values, things like preservation and disposition and retention, and those are not business values. Those are IM values. Preservation might be a value, I suppose, if you're an archaeologist or if you're an archivist. If you're a crime investigator, preservation might be a core value, but for most of us, we're only preserving in order to achieve something else. And I think it's something about accountability. That's why we're preserving the information. So it's not a core value. And as long as we only appeal to our values and we don't have our policy statements appeal to other people's values, that is the common values, we're always going to have an uphill battle. Okay, I've got a few minutes for questions. Let me take this. I'm going to leave it up in case I need it. How's that? I was going to take it down, but. So anyone who's still awake is welcome to ask a question.
No questions just yet. I really liked the question that Paul posed actually a bit earlier on about making sure, like, I guess getting to the point of whether you separate the guidance with the how-to section from the policy itself. I think I see personally at my firm, we have in the past got into the habit of mixing the two together, and it becomes unwieldy because they're so long. It's hard for people to understand what is the policy versus the how-to, and it's difficult to address your audience properly because you're addressing two sets of people really. Sometimes it's at least two. Sometimes the people that are getting the how-to are not the people who necessarily need the how-to. It's the others, the people that are reading the policy that also get all of that added information. And they might just stop reading and lose interest because it's just too long 100%. And it makes no practical sense. So
100%. Yeah. But I'm going to add some other benefits to splitting them apart. That is, I believe we should split them according to the approver. So it is the senior management that should be approving the values and the strategies and the general policy statements, but the actual details of the standards, that's weeds, right? The senior management should not be deciding whether we need a period or not in a file name. That's weeds. And by throwing all those weeds up into the policy, we are first of all saying it's out of an area of specialization. And we're putting them in the position of having to approve stuff that they may not understand. On the analogy of legislation, where we have an act, and then at the very bottom it says, at least, I mean, in Canada, we say the Governor General and Council. You must have a similar Secretary of State or somebody who is empowered to make regulations under this act. Mm-hmm. And the regulations are about, and then it lists them. It lists exactly what technical specs can be set out and approved. So what we want in our policies is a statement that says the Director of Information Governance or Information Management has the authority to approve standards and procedures on, and then list them, so that that content can be delegated to a different approver.
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult when you have so many policies and so many areas, but I take your point. You still need
Yeah.
to pinpoint who the people are that can assist and then help people navigate to them. Yeah. So there's another question, and I'll start the live answer now. So it's on screen, Lewis. Is it ever okay to use negative statements, e.g., you must not introduce malware to the network?
Yeah. So the way I approach, and it's a good question, the way I approach negative statements, I would start with, you can introduce software that is approved by IG to the network. That's, or anything on the approved list, or however you'd like to do it. I would start with that. Once in a while, there are times when you need to refer very specifically to something, and then I use the term refrain from, or abstain from, forgo. So our policy is that we refrain from introducing malware. By the way, instead of you, I use we, because you is already divisive between the rule maker and the rule follower. And I think it applies to you too. So it's, we do not introduce malware to the network is our policy. Okay, it applies to all of us, but yeah, but where you have to say something very specific, I use refrain from, we refrain from sharing passwords.
Yeah, so we will refrain from introducing malware to the network.
Yeah. Yeah. And interestingly enough, psychologists tell us that we remember the main verb, and then we add on all the other words. So in this one, what we remember is introduce malware. Oh, must not. Whereas if the main verb is refrain, we remember that better.
That makes sense. Okay, we have 2 minutes to go. Any final questions? Please use the question section.
Okay, let me stop my share. This is, I realize this is a lot of stuff, and you know what, if you want at some point in the future to look at a different session or something, to expand on some of it, I'm happy to do that. It's a big area.
It is, yeah, and actually that was a really useful overview, and I imagine based on a lot of the questions in the chat, people would like to see some examples and some scenarios of rewording from maybe an IG perspective. Maybe I'm speaking personally from what I would like to see, but I think it would be nice for us all to see sort of examples. So I don't know, maybe we can discuss doing a part 2, Lewis, but examples of how you might reword certain policies, and we don't have to sort of air our dirty laundry and bring our own policies to the forefront, but we can use some examples of the types of policies that we might have at our firms. Retention and disposition is a good example.
For sure.
I think that there's a lot that can tie people into must language. Okay, so there's another question here.
I should mention, I often post examples on my LinkedIn page. So you're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn. I mean, usually every second posting is an example of a rewording. Would it be okay to say we must follow? No, I just think we follow the guidance. We follow the standards. But I mean, I guess when we say why you would say that, do we have a statement in the criminal code that's saying we follow these rules? It's always, why would we have that statement? Is there an expectation that somebody say, well, if it isn't there, then I don't think it's going to be true. So I think it sounds a bit defensive when we put it there. I would rather put something really much more impersonal. That is, our goal is to target 100% compliance with the standards.
I always kind of see it as a rule of thumb not to include the word must because I feel like must is quite off-putting, and I agree using we rather than you helps not to put anyone on the back foot, if you like.
Mhm.
Okay. Lots of thanks in the chat, and some helpful takeaways for people here. So with that, we're on the hour, so we can wrap up today's session. Thank you ever so much, Lewis. It was a great session, really insightful. I think we all learned something from today, and maybe we'll put on a part two.
Hey,
Watch the
live would be
space.
great. I'd love to take a trip out.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to come over to Canada too. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's iram.ditto@rms.org.uk. And yeah, with that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.